Great. So welcome back to our Gen series, How We Built This. We're delighted to have James Toop, Jesus alumnus and CEO and co-founder of Bite Back 2030 with us today. James, welcome. I'm very excited to learn about Bite Back 2030, which is a very ambitious initiative, campaigning for access to healthy food for young people, which is so important. There's a lot to discuss here, a lot to unpack, especially since this is a youth-led movement, which is something quite unique about Bite Back 2030. Well, before we get into all of that, I thought we'd first tap into your background, if we may, and what led you here. Do you mind if we start at the beginning?
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from Jesus about 20 years ago now, I jumped straight into the social sector. Actually, I jumped into Teach First when it first started. So I spent 2 years teaching in a school in South Croydon in the south of London. Jumped from there back into the private sector to be a management consultant, which sort of probably would have been the typical career path for a lot of Jesus alumni at that point. And it was interesting that the experience with Teach First for me almost meant that it was impossible to have a long-term corporate career. I kind of always knew my heart was in trying to do good and to make a difference for young people, but Teach First really cemented it. And so I spent a period as a management consultant. I think you're a much better social sector leader if you've learned some of the corporate skills. And then I jumped after 3 years of consultancy to join a really innovative education charity called ARC, which is now growing to become one of the largest academy providers. But at the time, they had a series of ventures that they were starting up. And I started up with one of those ventures and grew it. And it was off the back of that it kind of took me to Bite Back. And there's a nice Jesus thread through it as well, because I didn't know about Teach First until I spoke to Nick Hazeman, who is sort of one of my good friends, who told me about it, and he'd applied early on. And then my route into ARC actually was through Nat Way, who's now Lord Way, who was head of ventures at ARC at the time, and we had connected through Teach First. So there was a nice Jesus thread through the different transition points as well.
That's really great to hear, in just small worlds, I think, in terms of these kind of Jesus paths crossing, and then also just that shared interest in that sector. So when you were working for Teach First and then ARC and Monitor Group, what did you gain, do you think, working from them? And when did you get that idea to strike out on your own with something called the Ambition Institute? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Teach First I can't recommend highly enough as a kind of leadership experience at the start of your career. I just think that the resilience you have to show, the fact that I suppose you're presenting every day to groups of children, facilitating conversations, learning. It was really, really formative for me in my leadership career. And to have that as such, the first point in your career was amazing. The Monitor experience kind of, I think, gave me a lot of the toolkit that I then needed to actually go and build a social sector organization. The financial modeling, the strategy development, the marketing, that side of things. And I guess I got to the end of Monitor and was thinking, oh, well, what's the next traditional step? Do I kind of go and do an MBA? And when I spoke to Nat, Lord Way, he said, don't bother doing an MBA, come and sort of do the MBA of life, come and set up a venture, scale it, grow it, and do it in the social sector. It's a lot more challenging there than the corporate sector. I'm sure other people would disagree, but you've got to both sort of raise the money, do everything you do in the corporate sector, but you've got to have a social impact as well. And so I think it was really that felt like the sort of next big, bold, ambitious step, and where I'd learn a ton. And really the idea, it wasn't called Ambition Institute at the time, it was called Teaching Leaders, was the forerunner charity. Really the idea was a lot of, it was problems I'd seen. So a lot of the best Teach First teachers were leaving to go off to other sectors and not coming or staying in education because there wasn't the next rung on the leadership ladder for them. There weren't really any bespoke, like high intensity leadership initiatives for like really early stage career teachers to go and develop. And the other thing was, I think in Teach First, loads of us had, we were all working really hard, but some people had a really different experience depending on the quality of the leadership of their school. And they were able to make a much bigger impact where the leadership was really strong. And I guess it showed to me that if we could focus really intensively on developing amazing leaders in our most disadvantaged schools, that was the most effective way we were going to see to actually lift up a school and transform the outcomes for all the kids in those schools as well. So we started what was Teaching Leaders, which was a kind of 2-year MBA style program for first-time leaders in schools, often going into their first leadership positions as like a head of English, a head of maths, and sort of it really built the pipeline of future leaders in the education system. Over the sort of 10 years that we ran it, we sort of trained 3,000 middle leaders sort of across the country. And then at a certain point into that journey, we decided to join up the different tiers of leadership programs and initiatives. So there was one focused on head teachers, one focused on Academy Trust CEOs, and I led 2 mergers, bringing together different charities to become Ambition Institute, which really joined up the career pathway to create a pathway through from your first leadership role in a school through to becoming an Academy Trust CEO. And Ambition Institute now works with thousands of school leaders every year, about 25% of kind of all secondary schools in the country. And it's now the biggest leadership provider to education, particularly focused on schools in disadvantaged areas. And I've seen so much of the education transformation journey over the last 20 years firsthand, and it's been a really just inspiring place to be.
That's really interesting. And I think that part of what you were trying to do with Ambition, it seems, is recognize that sort of gap in the market, so to speak, of what needed to be offered. I think something that probably everyone has heard about are some challenges in the education sector with teachers staying in schools, with that kind of commitment of opportunities to kind of rise in the profession or want to stay in, especially in some of those more underserved communities. So I think creating or seeing that need and how to address it in different ways, in building those leadership skills of showing the possibility for opportunity and growth is just really important and very exciting. That you could see that and start to facilitate that need. And have you seen some differences there, some strides, and actually helping to fortify that sector?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is cyclical. I mean, I think we're at the moment in a cycle where teacher retention is tougher. But overall, I would say, like, if you went back to 20 years ago, where the school I was in, if you went back into old money, was at maybe 18% 5A star to C with English and maths. The government floor now, before it shifted to 1 to 9s and everything, it was 40%. Like, there's been a massive shift up in terms of minimum expectations. And I think we're seeing sort of increasingly the best teaching and leadership happening in some of the most disadvantaged schools. Like, the teaching has to be better there than anywhere else to kind of make up for some of those gaps that kids start with when they're starting their education. And I guess I'm basically, I think, although this wasn't sort of conscious at the start of my career, kind of what I've seen looking back on it is the power of people and like leadership by people within systems to actually shift the system. And if you can, the idea with Ambition Institute was to kind of build that system up, almost fill that jug up, right, with amazing people going to some of the toughest places, and then the networks start to form. The connections start to form. So you see a head teacher will be recruiting from somebody else on one of the programs. That people will move between schools, but they'll stay because they're connected. They'll share learning. So this sort of ecosystem starts to build, really, of like-minded people really trying to make a difference. And I think that for me is also the key part of the retention. It is seeing career pathways, but more than that, it's feeling part of a big change movement that's happening within a system. And I worry a little bit at the moment that some of that reform effort is is waning a little, and that could be just because I've moved out of the sector now and I'm not as in touch with things. But I think that's really, really key, and certainly something I see now on the kind of food transformation space is that feeling of a group of people in it together trying to make a big difference.
So that's a great segue, actually. If we could turn now our attention to Bite Back 2030. So you were with Ambition for 8 years, and what was the path then to working with Jamie Oliver and getting into food? What was Jamie looking for in partnering with you, and jumping into food was then a crossover for you? So what did he see? What did you see? How did you want to come together? And exactly, maybe if it isn't cliche to say this, what were you bringing to the table, so to speak, in this partnership?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wasn't bringing the food knowledge. That's for sure. So I guess the thread for me throughout my career has really been kids, and children and young people from more disadvantaged backgrounds, and trying to tackle some of the inequalities. So if the first chapter of my career was all around education, I think I was keen to explore and see like other aspects of how we improve the life chances of young people. And I guess I've become increasingly interested in health, mental health, and other aspects of that side of child development. And so obesity, which is sort of the mission of Bite Back, is to halve childhood obesity in the UK by 2030. Really big, ambitious change effort. Also, a bit like the education sort of system shift that we were trying to achieve there, it's a big system change effort. So I guess the thing we were trying to do is then most of the shifts in obesity are driven by nutrition and diet. That's the kind of big thing. And we're trying to drive system level policy changes, corporate changes, to create healthier food environments for kids. And so I guess I'd reached a point in my career where I'd done the 2 mergers, had built Ambition Institute into the kind of the pathway through. I definitely felt like it needed the CEO who was going to take it on now for the next leg of the journey. And I'm always a big believer in like there's a right time to kind of move on and find your next challenge, both for you and for the organization. And I felt like I also wanted a fresh challenge in a different sector. So there was this opportunity that arose. Jamie had come together with a philanthropist. And I know we might talk about funding and sort of routes to funding, but both Ambition Institute and Bite Back have hedge funds philanthropists behind them, which brings with it its own sort of pressures and expectations and ways of operating. But Jamie had teamed up with a philanthropist, Nikolai Tangen, who now runs the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And they wanted to do this big initiative to tackle child health, and brought me in. Again, the small world point, the former CEO of Teach First was advising them and helping them. So I sort of got a connection through that into meeting Jamie and Nikolai. And I was brought in as the CEO to set up the charity, kind of create the brand, create the strategy, get it all going, and take it from there. And I guess, I mean, maybe if I say a little bit about our strategy, how we operate, like how we've gone about it. So as I said before, like the food system and trying to transform the food system is a huge challenge. And it was interesting in Ambition that what we were trying to do was to go almost school by school and build up from one unit of change to reach a tipping point in the system. Whereas what we're coming at with Bite Back is almost trying to say, how do you kind of create the infrastructure and the policy changes in order to start to shift a system. So it's a very different sort of way of operating. And I think when Jamie and Nikolai originally envisaged it, they wanted a new organization that was going to kind of become a convener, bring everyone together. And I guess I had a different view of the strategy from sort of going out and speaking to lots of people. I felt that there were plenty of convening organizations in this space, doing a great job, and we didn't need another one. What we actually needed was an organization taking a really kind of fresh approach to tackling the issue. So we decided that we were going to focus on young people. as the kind of key storyteller of the issue. Helpfully, Greta was kind of doing her thing at the time, and we said, actually, there's tremendous power here in informed, passionate young people advocating for change. That's really, really powerful with political decision makers. And if we can find the right young people, tool them up, train them, and support them then to kind of drive change, we're onto something really effective. And we've sort of seen it becomes its own convening superpower, because suddenly a campaign fronted by a young person has a different way of cutting through. So we had a different storyteller. And then the other thing we tried to do is we're trying to tell a different story. So everyone else is, you end up in this system with a constant battle between public health NGOs like Cancer Research, Diabetes UK, with the food industry kind of going head to head, and the narrative being quite adversarial and also quite stigmatizing. The media narrative around obesity is quite stigmatizing. So we've tried to talk about child health and every young person having the right to be healthy. And it's already a much more unarguable space to be in, because who can argue with wanting every kid to have access to healthy, nutritious food? So we found that through a different story and a different storyteller, we've been able to be quite effective. And that was really the kind of start of the strategy there.
Yeah, I really actually want to tap into that different story, different storyteller, if I may, because being, working with this youth-led movement really is a great USP for what you're doing. And I'm very interested in maybe hearing a little bit about the structure, the Bite Back Youth Board, and why that's so different and why it works. So what are you learning from the youth board, and how does that inform the decisions you're making at the top?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because it's suddenly become quite fashionable to have a youth board if you're an NGO. And we had a real advantage in that we didn't exist before. So when we started, we could make everything, like the governance structure, the decision-making processes, everything really youth-led. And I think we're still learning about what this means, but I think we've been able to do it really authentically and effectively. So the first thing, so I suppose the first thing to say is, like, we knew that young people wouldn't be interested in a narrative about healthy, nutritious food. I probably spent the first year being told it wouldn't work, it was pointless. Young people were much more interested in climate change and knife crime and campaigning on other issues like that. So we sort of first thing, we sort of looking at some of the research that academics have done on adolescent engagement. The way to do it is to tap into what young people already care about. So what are those underlying themes that tap into their values that they really care about? So we found that, and if you got those and hooked them to food, then suddenly they were really, really interested. So one of those was food and social injustice, kind of, which led us into kind of really early work on free school meal campaigning at the start of the pandemic. The other was food and truth and honesty in the food system. So young people don't like being manipulated by big corporations, and that's really prevalent in big food. So tapping into some of those things led us into campaigns to restrict junk food advertising on TV and online. And then the third theme was food and the future of the planet, which we haven't done as much work on, but is the next big theme for us. So we sort of tapped into those themes and started really just talking to young people about what they cared about, what they saw, listening to the stories of their days. And from that, we started to build out some campaign areas. And basically, the first sort of iteration of Bite Back, which was the first couple of years, was really trying to drive big government level campaigns on school food, free school meals, and advertising of junk food. And really what we did is, I guess, every one of our campaigns, we do youth research at the beginning. We create creative assets that tell the story. So those are always kind of co-created and conceived by our young people. So they've decided on what the kind of campaign priorities are. They then create the narrative, they lead the research, and then critically they present it. So that could be presenting to a group of MPs, it could be meeting the public health minister. It's also doing media interviews. So you'll very rarely hear me speak about what Bite Back in the media. It's normally one of our young people. And so like really from start to finish, young people are kind of setting the strategy and leading the external communications and engagement. And we talk about a kind of Bite Back family that is both the kind of young people and the team that I lead, because really we're supporting them every step of the way. And it's a real partnership, I think, because sometimes they'll push us in, you know, they'll just be like, that idea would never work. Like that's just, you know, young people wouldn't do that. And equally, we might be coaching them and saying, well, look, I really like your idea here, but it's unlikely you'll see a policy change on that issue at the moment because of all these reasons. If you sort of adapted the way you're talking about it to this issue, you're much more likely to cut through. So there's a real two-way dynamic kind of in the way that it operates. And we have a youth board, and every youth board, they lead their own campaigns. They're supported by kind of a youth worker on our side. They meet every couple of weeks for virtual meetings, come together for training. So we've structured it as almost a 12-month leadership program. My wife always says to me, she's like, you do realize you basically just created the school leadership charity, but with young people campaigning on food. And so there is a definite element there of like people driving system change and youth leadership. But it has been really, really effective. And you get these moments of gold which you can't prepare for. They kind of just happen. I remember like Dev, who's one of our young people that led our junk food advertising campaign, being in a meeting with the public health minister, just sort of like getting out his phone in the meeting and scrolling through all the Instagram ads and the push notifications that he gets from fast food companies. And Christina, who is another one of our campaigners, being on a panel with the managing director of KFC, who said, we don't market to kids. And she's like, hang on, I'm going to have to stop you. Like, you definitely do. I've seen your videos, like the rap music you use, like it's definitely appealing to a youth audience. And like, so that sort of the challenges and the stories you get and the authenticity of it really kind of comes through in quite surprising and powerful ways, I guess.
I think that is, I mean, it's so interesting, that point on marketing and marketing fast food, because I think that, just from my own experiences, I can't get through watching an episode of Dairy Girls without being pummeted by about, 10 or so advertisements for Domino's, and it's just so invasive in the culture. It's just so prevalent, and so I think, and the marketing, you're absolutely right. It's not just hitting a certain target audience level age group. It's really also targeting the youth as well. So it's fantastic to be able to get actually the people, the youth leaders kind of talking and saying, no, we're seeing this is coming to us, and we're getting it firsthand, and we don't like it. So I think that can be obviously a very powerful statement. And that, I think I wanted to talk a little bit about the communities that you need to tackle, because you have government on one side, then you obviously have these big companies, these huge sponsors that generate a lot of revenue from kind of needing to target these markets, and coming up against that, and different corporations that would depend on that sponsorship, and that really kind of unhealthy dependency, to be quite literal about it. And then also you've got schools that you need to kind of talk about, what they're marketing to students, what they're bringing in, what brands that they're partnering with in terms of what children can buy at the school, or what's being served in the cafeterias. And then of course also the families, because it must also go down to a community level and structure, with the families of these children, and actually getting them to change their mindset as well. So how are you kind of dividing and conquering the board to look after these areas?
Yeah, I mean, you've sort of summarized the challenge really, really well, because like on the school leadership charity, essentially it was like run a program, train a leader, and then like rinse and repeat and multiply and scale, and sort of you would get to a tipping point through there. Whereas the food system and promoting health through food is so diverse and it's so multifaceted. So you have to draw some lines and accept like you can't do everything. And any campaign that Bite Back's won, we've been campaigning alongside a group of other NGOs. So I think we sort of break down our 10 years into 3 phases. There's what we're trying to do is see a massive shift amongst sort of 3 big groups. So the first is government, and I probably would include kind of schools in that kind of government public sector space, the food industry, and then I guess consumers and the public. And we've started with government because I think government sets the mood music really for the rest of the system. You've started to see many more food companies starting to move because the government narrative and policies on sort of food regulation have started to ramp up, and then companies start to make shifts because they can see the trend coming and they want to be ahead of the trends. And ultimately, we also need consumers to come because we need in the future for it to be more politically acceptable to have bolder regulation and policies, but also to have businesses to be like, it should be profitable, to be more profitable to sell healthy food than to sell unhealthy food. We don't think about the true cost of food at the moment. So we think about those big audiences. And I guess we started off with Bite Back saying, we're going to start basically campaigning to central government. That's sort of been Bite Back 1.0. But as we said, that's just part of the challenge. And we have run and do occasionally run sort of campaigns targeting food companies. But I suppose we've tried to have a dialogue with the food industry. And this is quite contentious in the NGO space. There's lots of NGOs who say, voluntary reform within the food industry just doesn't work. You should not engage. We should just have government regulation. But we've engaged because our young people kind of their brands they love, like they do like McDonald's, they like Deliveroo, and they want them to be part of the positive story for change. So we've engaged this year in our first leadership dialogues, bringing together corporates like Deliveroo, KFC, Tesco, with young people. We ran some residentials, bringing them together, sharing perspectives, and they're each committing to identify a change goal through our Food Systems Accelerator, a commitment towards child health that's going to be externally evaluated by Nesta, and we're going to hopefully present them in November. And what we're trying to see is this a model whereby through the power of kind of youth dialogue with business, we're kind of creating a space where they can be real leaders and sort of in the transformation. And you get some surprising things, like KFC really do see leadership on health as a key part of their future, or at least being healthier, I guess, is a kind of key thing they're aware of. So I think we're engaging in that dialogue and trying to kind of move that forward. So that's been a kind of key part. And then we're also looking at local government as well, and sort of cities. So we started off with a national youth board, and now we're recruiting in 6 cities. So we're kind of scaling the youth movement across different parts of the country. And we'll be working with like the Andy Burnham's team in Manchester, Steve Rotherham in Liverpool City region, sort of to try and look at local level change, probably focusing on things like street level advertising and public transport advertising. And then we've also built it out into schools. So we'll be working with a couple of thousand children through our School Food Champions program, where we're training up young leaders within schools to then try and lead change within their school canteens and caterers. Because the big thing at the moment is, and I understand why, but lots of school leaders just don't really prioritize food and school meals as a kind of key part of the day. And I think it's starting to shift. We sort of saw through the pandemic that a lot of schools now have food banks, basically, and teachers were out delivering food to kids through the pandemic. This, with the cost of living crisis really rising, the issues of like getting access to a good healthy meal, school is probably the one place that for a lot of kids they're going to get it. And I think school leaders are starting to see it. but we found that the most effective way is to get young people calling on their school leaders to prioritize this as a way to drive change. So yeah, so I guess, and I guess there's a similar theory, which is that as we start to build up enough of the youth movement, as government regulation starts to kind of move forward, companies can see that this is the future. It's going to create a virtuous circle where it's, you know, it's attractive, it's profitable to promote health and to go down that direction. It definitely won't be easy though. Like it's and we've already encountered like some big setbacks along the way. So it's a big change effort. And the last thing I'd say, and then, sorry, is the investor bit is the other really interesting bit. So we're starting now to see investors calling on publicly owned food businesses to really promote health. So we've been working with Share Action on, they've completed shareholder actions with Unilever, Tesco, and others. And like that feels like it's something really kind of going to start to build, is that, you know, because for a lot of those investment companies, it's like our money held in pension funds. And so how that can be a real force for change in shifting things and setting targets for health, I guess, for those companies too.
That's very exciting potential development. And I just wanted to actually, you're sort of mentioning that you can get some pushback from your youth board, which can lead to some interesting discussions and maybe change the focus a little bit. So if you're going down one direction and they kind of push back and say, no, you know, we wouldn't respond to any of this. This isn't how to you know, communicate to the youth or kind of effectively push the story along. So I wanted to maybe say, what are the challenges of working with this group? And you know, I'm sure if you're working on a marketing campaign and they just go, absolutely not, it can be a bit discouraging. On the other hand, I think also working with a youth board, potentially timelines can start to get discouraging because you don't change something overnight. I imagine working, you know, alongside the government, having these conversations, coming up with these big corporations and having them see and think differently. And all of that takes time to embed. So how do you keep people motivated? What are the challenges there?
Yeah, great question. And I think so our experience, and we do really sort of think about it as an experience, you know, it's lots of NGOs sort of pay young people for their time, and we haven't done that. We've structured it as a, you know, an amazing transformative leadership experience for them. You know, where else do you get to go on the BBC News to meet the CEO of Deliveroo, to, you know, these types of experiences and opportunities they get are unparalleled. And so we structure, we sort of have periodic points where we bring them all together for training and development. And so that gives them the kind of formal development, but also it gets them to meet up and build friendship groups, and which is really key. Like it's important, like I can't understate enough, like that thing about feeling together and part of something. The connections they make and the friendships they build really sustain it too. So we always recruit youth boards in groups of 15 to build that peer connection. We make sure we throw in fun as well, like have parties and trips and karaoke and whatever they choose they want to do, really, like those types of things. And I think it has also really helped now with technology, and like that. They do often, so they lead their own meetings, so they'll chair their own meetings. There's various WhatsApp groups that will ping as they try and make sure everyone's joining the Zoom call at the right time to run through the different aspects. But I guess I suppose the other thing is like it's got to feel exciting, and like the campaigns are big and like resonate with them. So that I suppose that's one of the challenges, is like, how do you keep it building and moving forward and giving everyone the opportunity? Because one of the challenges I think you see with a lot of youth movements is you get one person as a figurehead, and everybody kind of wants them and goes back to them. And we've tried to kind of make it long-term sustainable, so to give lots of young people opportunities to go and speak in the media, lead campaigns. So we try and distribute that. So if you went through the different campaigns we've run, you'd go that you almost got owners of campaigns amongst the youth boards and relationship owners with some of the food businesses. So I think that kind of it's got to kind of feel exciting and like they're developing all the time as well. And one of the challenges, I guess, is that sometimes these political processes are so long that I mean, the young people are just like, what are they doing? Why, like, how long can it take to like get this thing through Parliament or to like make a decision on this? And the Prime Minister's just recently U-turned on some big decisions, which we might touch on. But I mean, one story which I think was just really impressive about just how the youth leadership works. We ran an event where our young people interviewed executives from like one big food manufacturer that's like quite big on breakfast cereal and a retailer. The manufacturer sort of came off the back of it. They gave him quite a hard time over cereal sizes, cartoon characters, a whole bunch of sort of things and other tactics that are used. Like, I mean, a portion size of breakfast cereal. I mean, breakfast cereal is generally bad, like it's not good, but like a portion size of breakfast cereal on the side of the packet is not what a teenager eats. And they'll typically have like a day's worth of sugar in their breakfast cereal. But anyway, so this company sort of came back to us and said, look, we want to try and work with your youth board to create a new breakfast cereal that's going to be healthy. And so we want to sort of pitch the idea to them. And the youth, so a couple of the youth board went and met with them, fed it back to the rest of the youth board, and they had this like hour-long discussion, which they facilitated themselves, which I listened in on. And they made the decision like not to partner with this big food business because they just didn't feel the size of change and impact was like big enough for the time and also the potential kind of compromise on their power to call for change. And it was quite an early stage in Bite Back, and I was just so impressed with the way they like. It was better than most boardroom conversations I've been in with adults. Respectful, they listened, they shared different viewpoints, and then they took the tough decision to say no. And in some ways, I thought it could have been really good for Bite Back because it could have helped grow a big project. But they were just really clear about their rationale and what it meant, and it was just very powerful to let them get on with it and have the conversation. And I think they really appreciated the space to do it.
That's great. And I think that there's a really important lesson to be learned. And we had this, we have a great question from Rena in the audience. And before I get to that, I think in just my own experience being American, I think what we get marketed, how we get marketed, it's stricter over here, thank goodness. It's still quite bad, but I remember going through the grocery shopping aisle and seeing, a box of Pop-Tarts, a little toaster pastry that's very common for kids to eat in America. And I remember a big sticker label put over it in the UK grocery store saying, not real fruit contained in this. And I remember seeing it and just actually being really shocked, because obviously we don't have to put anything like that in the US labels. Hopefully over time that's going to be changing too, but it is so interesting in terms of tackling on all these different fronts, and also the the youth that you're working with, these panels, getting them to know that maybe, as you were saying before, it's about the journey, it's about the collective, it's about everyone coming together towards a much greater change that we're striving for, versus, it's going to be sometimes some immediate wins, but then sometimes long stretches where it will feel like nothing's happening, and it's all about kind of staying on that journey and being part of it for the time that you get to experience it. So just wanted to actually touch on Rena's question. So she says, I've noticed the cost of school dinners has risen and the quality and offer has declined over the last couple of years with COVID, removing salad bar and other healthier options. How is this going to be improved? James, do you see this maybe naturally changing, and not after COVID, but what we're calling this kind of different stage post-COVID, if we may, time where things might be coming back in terms of what we were used to before, but maybe with some other changes. Do we think that the salad bar is gone forever? What changes are you seeing?
Yeah, hi Irene, I hope you're well. Thanks for the question. I think we might only be seeing the start of the problems with school dinners, to be honest. COVID is one factor, but I think that you're going to start to see with Brexit and Ukraine that the cost of food is just going to keep going up, and so there's a multitude of just sort of different issues. There are standards for school food. Jamie would always say, because when he campaigned to get them in the first place, there were like standards for dog food, but there weren't standards for school food. So in 2013, school food standards were introduced, and that takes you back to kind of all the old Turkey Twizzler campaigns and everything. So they were introduced, and I think there was quite a lot of focus on them probably in the first few years. But then what's happened over time is there's no accountability mechanism for whether they're actually delivered, other than the school leader talking to the caterers and checking that they're being implemented. So kind of what's happened is there's been a natural kind of drop off in standards, and we led a campaign towards the end of last year to get the government to actually implement new mechanisms to monitor school food. So there are pilots happening now with the Food Standards Agency. We're going to be going in and actually looking at whether schools are meeting the school food standards, and there will be mandatory reporting from schools on their school food strategy and how they're planning to actually check that school food is meeting the right quality. So I think a lot of it is down to leadership and the focus on leadership, and making sure that schools value this, have a good hour for lunch, that kids have an opportunity to sit down. It's good for teacher well-being, and there are some inspiring models we see of like family dining in schools. A good friend of mine from Teach First runs a school in Feltham. Everyone does family dining. Every kid has to have a lunch. There isn't this sort of cafeteria style pick from 10 different options. It's one option. There's a veggie version and a meat version, if at all, and everyone eats it. They eat together. They serve each other using this family dining model. There's no food waste. It's really cheap, and I think we need leadership to focus on it, but we also need more innovative offers. And I think that the narrative that's building now is that the cost of food is increasing, and there's two issues at the moment. So there are more and more kids. So the number of kids eligible for free school meals has just gone up to 1.9 million. But even that threshold is very low to get to be eligible for free school meals. And I think there's a lot of kids we're missing out on. So at the moment, the free school meal threshold needs to go up. So a lot of campaign groups are asking for more kids to be eligible for that free school meal. This will also have a benefit to caterers, because at the moment, that there are real cost pressures on caterers because of the cost of food, and I think that's going to continue growing. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I think we could see a return to the salad bar and to healthier options, but I think it requires leadership choices, and it also requires there to be kind of economies of scale in the system that mean caterers can provide that healthy option to enough kids. And I think the solution to that is expanding the eligibility of free school meals, which will have a myriad of other benefits to get that. And I guess those are some of the areas that Bite Back's trying to work on. And it was interesting, again, like our campaign to get the government to notice that school food standards were low. It wasn't like statistics. We basically just got lots and lots of young people to tell the story about their experience of school food and the offers that they had. And again, that was really powerful for ministers and other people to hear.
That's great. I'm going to apologize quickly for a moment, and for any alumni on the call, it's finals time here in Oxford, and I can hear that we have a crowd out of students out on first quad celebrating quite noisily. So if we hear some cheers, I hear some of the corks going outside and champagne popping and cheers from the students. So we might be interrupted by that as we go along. I wanted just to mention actually, so one thing that we always ask in this series is, what was that breakthrough moment for you where you thought, okay, this could really work, this is the direction we're going to go? And what was maybe a setback that you had, your biggest setback at a moment where you thought, oof, this little thing could have been a big disaster and made it all fall apart, if you might. I think sharing those both sides are really important. It's just what makes us human, and can kind of, sharing that story can be really insightful.
Yeah. So I guess the moment I thought it could work was in the start of, so I had to fight quite hard for the focus on youth. And probably like a lot of startup stories, everyone tells you it's not going to work. And so I think the moment that I felt it could work was when we had our first big breakthrough campaign. So Christina started a petition on free school meals. So this is the very start of the pandemic. Kids were getting a free school lunch actually delivered home to them, often from schools, and the tap was going to get turned off when they hit the Easter holidays because there was no funding provision. And so you had this absurd situation that kids were being educated at home, getting delivered food on a Friday, but then that food wasn't going to come on a Monday. Lots of people were struggling because they couldn't access work. And if you're in the gig economy, it's really, really tough. So we started a petition on change.org to get the government to fund free school meals through the holidays. And it just touched a nerve. Christina's petition went up to nearly 500,000 signatures. She started appearing on the press. The government U-turned at the Easter holidays and then the May half term. And then at a certain point, I remember kind of coming out the other side of the May half term, and then this footballer appeared on the weekend news talking about wanting to get free school meals funded through the summer holidays. It was Marcus Rashford, and so he kind of took the campaign on from there. But I think that that moment where Christina's, you're just watching the petition signatures go up through the tens of thousands to the hundreds of thousands, and I was like, having a young person with lived experience, and she was on free school meals, like articulating it and telling the story is just so powerful. And I think that was the first thing where we just got it right. And then I guess obviously, like, you have setbacks all the time, right? You have some great wins on certain things, other things fail. And I guess there are lots of things that feel really risky. So even that campaign, it's unbelievable the amount of trolling and abuse that targeted at our young people on social media. We've just been through a kind of another campaign recently around the government's U-turn on advertising, where they were quite prominent. And I think you're always really mindful working with young people and putting them in the public eye, just how risky that is. And so we think really hard about that, the opportunities, the messages, how we support them. But I think fundamentally that they're all really passionate. And I guess we feel that this is basically like, this change is going to come. Like the food, I saw actually Angela's question in the chat as well, which I was going to just sort of touch on, but I feel like the food system was set up post-war to feed a population that didn't have enough food. And we now have food in abundance, and 40% of our food is wasted. There's like, I think, a national scandal that there is so much food waste that could be redistributed. Yeah, how do we have so much food waste and so much hunger? Like that system just isn't working. But fundamentally, like, the food system has been developed now. There is abundance of food. It's produced cheaply by big corporations. What needs to happen now is we need to actually adapt the food system to solve the next problem, which is how do we feed people in a healthy way that's healthy for people and healthy for the planet, because food contributes 1/3 of global emissions. It's the biggest emitter after oil and gas. So what we have a different problem here, and this change is going to come. Like it's going to have to happen. So any setbacks we see along the way, like the Prime Minister U-turning on things, if you look at any other campaign space, you kind of have to just keep going, because you're going to get there. Like it might not be this time round, but every setback is just it's a prelude to actually when you're going to get the change, I think. So and I would say that the Prime Minister's U-turn on he's just U-turned a couple of weeks ago on restrictions on multi-buy food and also TV and online advertising of junk food. That was a real major setback, I think, for us. And we need to get that back in place, because so many of the future policy change, regulation, and also the sort of the tone it sets for the rest of the food industry to keep reforming, like, hangs off some of those real foundational policies that need to be in place. Because I firmly believe it is the government regulation that's going to get the wheel turning on sort of wider change.
Well, sorry to hear that. And I think it's part of this longer process of embedding, I think, that we were talking about, and the fact that that you have to continue to motivate the team to keep plugging along and understand. I'm sure that's also a challenge, of course, with your youth volunteers, to get them to understand that you can make 4 steps forward and then take 3 steps back kind of overnight, and that can probably be very discouraging. I think the trolling that you mentioned and just the online space, on the one hand, for the youth, the social media space is just so important now to communicating these very important messages. It's an essential tool for the next generations. But then on the other side of that, we just see more than ever before this kind of rise in the mental health, scary rises in how online trolling and this level of constant communication and feedback can kind of lead to some damaging side effects, and keeping people's morale up if they're believing in something and they're championing something and it meets resistance online in certain negative ways. How do they break through and just understand that that's all noise, that they can, if they keep focusing on that path. So huge congratulations to you and what you're trying to do in terms of working with this team and getting them to understand it's a process, and there are just so many different things to kind of be juggling, and understanding that the outside noise as well, you don't have to pay attention to it. It's not a reflection on what you're trying to do. It's all part of a longer process of change, and people are resistant to change. They always have been, they always will be. So in terms of, we tapped a little bit on funding and support of this kind, what's the ballpark figure that you need to work with to launch this sort of initiative? And what should you be aiming for prior to launch in terms of people on your side and this kind of thing, just for people that might be interested in doing this kind of work in the future?
Yeah, so I've always had the benefit, like, whenever I've started something, I mentioned before that I've had sort of some hedge fund philanthropists sort of come in. So ARC is funded by Marshall Wace, and Bite Back sort of initially funded by AKO Foundation, which is part of Nikolai's funding through AKO Capital. And I think, like, that level of injection at the beginning kind of gets you started. It gives you the freedom to develop a strategy, like set up, recruit a team, because I think it's very hard. Like, getting that first tranche of money is really hard, because that's kind of what gives you the opportunity to make it the day job and to hire a few other people and make something real. And then you kind of need that proof point to bring in the next level of funding. So we were quite lucky that we had our core team, like the budget in the first year was sort of about $500,000 to kind of get going. And then we're 3 years in now. Our turnover this year will be sort of in the region of 2.5 to 3 million. And our team's now grown to 25 staff. So, and most of that funding, so from examples like Christina's campaign, you can then go to other funders and say, look, we're trying to we want to grow here. So we have sort of 3 groups of funders, and most of our funding now beyond the initial sort of high net worth group is through more established trusts and foundations. So we're kind of tapping into Esme Fairbairn, the Rothschild Foundation, Oak Foundation, so some of those groups. And there's a group which really focuses on youth development. So we've tried to kind of really peg it to our area of expertise, to the interest funders have. So to grow our youth programs, we're tapping into like the I Will Funds, Blagrave Trust, like we get youth development funding. We get funding from health foundations, so like Impact on Urban Health. And then we also get it from now food systems transformation spaces. So like Oak and Rothschild are really interested in that space. And so I think the hardest thing I think with the funding is to, how do you, is particularly for us, like, it wasn't like we were doing one thing and trying to scale it. I think it's probably taken us 2 to 3 years to figure out. We had a core of what we did, which was a national youth board. Then we built out that core because it was going well, and we recruited at city levels. We're now starting to work with corporates. We're building out our comms activity. So like that core has sort of grown. And I think we're now 3 years in at a point where we're like, we've run quite a few things that target our big audiences. We have models that work. And one of our funders now has said, we want to support you for 5 years at a significant like funding level to grow, but we're going to need to like look at how you scale that core over the next 5 years. So I think we're now finally at a point where we could say, right, we think we know what our core is, and we're clear now it needs to get 10 times bigger than it is now. So what does the model look like to scale? What's the funding requirements? Who do we need to go and approach, and how do we do that? That feels like the stage we're at now.
That's very helpful information, I think, for anyone that might be contemplating that in the future. Also, some great suggestions in the chat from Angela about team building and healthy dinner making, kind of hands-on experience to get people to understand this initiative and this drive. I have maybe a obvious question to close with, because 2030 is not too far away now. So what is the ambition for Bite Back 2030? Is it job done come 2030? Where do you go from here? What is next for Bite Back and for you?
Yeah, I think so it isn't a long way away, and I think that it's very like I like, hand on heart, I probably shouldn't say this, right, but like I think success by 2030 would, like, if we started to see, I think as soon as the system starts to shift, it's going to become unstoppable. Like, it will just continue to roll and roll and roll. And I think at the moment it feels not like just turning around an oil tanker, it's like turning around a fleet of oil tankers. And so I think as soon as they start to turn, it's only going to go one way, like we're seeing with renewables and we in terms of how we measure success, obviously yes, the headline metric is childhood obesity rates, but really what is driving that is a food system that needs to transform. And so we've got big policy goals and big corporate commitments, and we can measure the percentage sale of healthy food versus unhealthy food and those types of things. So if that started to see a transformative shift in those big areas, those big policy wins, then we would really know that, like, it's going to come. It might not come by 2030 because we probably need to have loads of those implemented already by now. But like, I think that it is realistic by 2030 to have loads of those big levers starting to be pulled and to be turning. It might take till 2040, who knows? But I feel like at the moment with Bite Back, we're staying focused on 2030. We're staying focused on those policy campaigns, and also just what we're learning about what makes youth-led campaigning really effective. Because I kind of feel you could take the Bite Back model and apply it to air pollution. You could apply it to loads of other issues. So I think there is a definite kind of clear, we just keep our heads down and keep moving forward with Bite Back. We've already been having conversations with like UNICEF and others about replicating the model in other countries. Could you do that? That's sort of one area for expansion, but we're still like massively underscale in the UK. Like, we want to be in 20 to 30 cities, have a national youth board in Scotland, Wales, Ireland. There's a long way for us to go there, and a lot more companies to work with. So yeah, I think like still head down and plowing forward, but aware of the size of the challenge ahead. But I think, and as I said at the start, like, the thing that gives me hope at the moment is the number, like, there is more and more funding coming into food and food systems transformation. It'll be on the agenda at COP. It wasn't on the agenda really at COP last time. It's coming. health and like awareness about obesity and unhealthy food and diet like is just growing and growing. So you can feel the momentum really coming. So I think, yeah, I think it's going to come. We just need to hold our nerve and keep working hard.
I think that's a really encouraging note to end on, which is just that, there's this great opportunity for growth, over the next few years, and you'll just build hopefully from strength to strength and expand the program, which is really promising and encouraging. And also this idea that it could, this model can be applied maybe to other countries, and take a much broader strokes approach and make some real difference globally, if possible. It's kind of up to the next few years to decide, and there's a lot of opportunity to take this forward. So James, thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. We at Jesus are just so proud of the incredible work you're doing with Bite Back 2030. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and how you got to this place and what you're doing with the organization. And thanks to everyone for attending today's session. How We Built This is taking hiatus for summer, so we look forward to our next event in autumn. And bye for now, everyone, and thank you so much. And thank you, James.
Thanks, Brittany. Thanks everyone for joining as well.
Bye-bye.